And so this is not going to take a long time to read. Matthew 21-16, for the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner, Jesus is speaking a parable, who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, you also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right. So they went. He went out again about noon, about 3 in the afternoon, and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing? But because no one has hired us, they answered. He said to them, will you also go and work in my vineyard? When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the workers and pay their wages, beginning from the last ones hired, going on to the first. The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those who were hired first, they were expected to receive more, but each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. Those who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work in the heat of the day. But he answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last. If there is a parable that disturbs many of us, it has to be this, right? Because to you and to me, this streaks of unfairness. And because we are facing in 2 days the national elections for president, let me just put this out there and take it and put it aside afterwards. In my family, in my home, in your homes, at work, in your circle of influence, in your friends, even here at church, there is a divide. And what I'm saying that because I'm not saying that we're the only ones that this is happening to. This is happening all over the country. There's stories of brothers who are not talking to each other because they're politically different from each other. And so I know that even in this church and even in my own family, even at work, this is a very sore issue. Last night I went out with a friend, and one of the things that we did not want to talk about is politics, because we know that we are going to disagree. And so we kind of talked about it a little bit. And because I'm a pastor, she said, well, you get the last word. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm going to tell my church on tomorrow. And I said, and I'm going to say this now. On Wednesday, when you wake up, the 9th of November, you're going to wake up to a president that you either voted for and you wanted to be president of this country, or you're going to wake up to a president that you do not want, or you did not want to be president of this country. You only have 2 choices, obviously. Even if you don't vote, which I recommend that you do. But even if you don't vote, you're going to wake up the next day on Wednesday, and you're going to wake up to someone you don't like or to someone you really like. At that point, here's what I tell you. You now lose control of anything and everything that you think you have control of. Because this is the time. It's interesting to be preaching this, and I have a happy birthday thing glistening over here. But I'm being very honest and being very honest and frank with you, that whatever happens in this election, God is in control. God controls the rising of kings and the taking down of kings, or queens for that matter. And so you should not be upset about it. You should not throw a tantrum. You should keep talking to your friends at church. Yeah, I will still keep talking to my friend that I went out last night, and I'm going to keep talking to everyone, because now you let the Lord take control. It doesn't matter who becomes president of this country. I truly believe that the Lord is the leader. The Lord is in control, and He's God of the universe and God of this country. Do you believe that? And so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who gets raised and who we vote for. It doesn't matter if your vote didn't work and you said, I knew it, I shouldn't have voted. Or it doesn't matter if you've been campaigning or if you were campaigning, you've been thinking, you've been debating. It doesn't really matter. What happens after that, the policies and all the rules and the laws that come after that is out of our hands right now. But I know and I truly believe that it's in the hands of God. And so we leave it at that. We leave it at that, and we continue living our lives as Christians. And so this parable is, as I said a while ago, reeks of unfairness. And there's a lot of issues of being fair and justice and being just on who's supposed to be in this country and who's not supposed to be in this country. And there's a huge debate about that, and we're putting that aside. And this is exactly what this parable is about. I mean, imagine if you're one of the workers that came afterwards, and you're one of the workers that came in the morning. And as you can see in this would have been a typical scene in the days of the Bible. Just as we have employment agencies nowadays, we have temp agencies here. We have workers that are kind of milling around in the parking lot, not this parking lot, but in the parking lot, and they're trying to get work. It's kind of like it was in the first century. And there were places where day laborers were seeking work, and they would gather. And these workers were usually unskilled, were always unskilled at a trade, and were near the bottom of the social economic scale. And so they're very poor, and they don't really have, obviously they don't have work. In fact, many lived at a level not far above beggars. So if you have a beggar, they're not they're not begging, but at least they're working, and so they're looking for work, and they work from job to job, many of which lasted no more than a day, because they had no guarantee of work beyond that, what they'd be doing at that time. And so they would gather in the marketplace before dawn to be available for hiring. Now, working in a vineyard, and those of you who have been farmers, you've done that. I haven't done that. I've been in a farm, but when we worked the farm, I was in an air-conditioned combine and tractor. I wasn't like out there picking up corn. We made the machine do that. But working in a vineyard was not easy work. And at harvest time, which is about the time that this was being told, the grapes had to be picked, often in temperatures of 100 degrees or more. Those of you who have lived in the Middle East, you know what that means. It may not be humid, but it's very hot. And when I say hot, Jeff can tell you what hot is. And those of you who have lived and worked in Saudi Arabia or in other parts of the Middle East, it kind of bites you. It's like there's a bunch of animals that are biting you at the same time because of the heat. And grapes had to be picked often in temperatures of 100 degrees or more. And these workers were promised the pay of a denarius. Now, this was the wage of a Roman soldier. So think about that. While this might not mean too much to us, it meant a great deal for those who were listening to Jesus tell this parable. Being a Roman soldier was not the most glorious or the most prestigious job, but it was higher up in the social ladder than the common laborer. And so the promise of a denarius to a day laborer would have been quite generous for the guy who was giving them that pay. And so they agreed to this rate. They're like, that's what you're going to pay me? Sure, I'll go for it. The equivalent of that today would have been $50. No, you might say, well, that's not a lot for 8 hours of work. But during that time, obviously, that's a lot of money. Now, this particular landowner, it seems like his property was very large, and so he needed more laborers to get the job done. If you read the verses again, it seems like he's going out and hiring every 3 hours. The phrase, I will pay you whatever is right, in verse 5 shows us that these workers, no doubt, trusted the man who was the owner of this vineyard. And while the owner does not promise a particular wage, and if you notice it, in the beginning he promised the starting workers a wage. But after that, he never said anything. Did you hear that? And if you're going for a job, you never don't want to do that, right? Because you're like, no, I want to know how much I'm going to get paid. Because it's going to be too late if I'm already working, and then I get my paycheck, and that's all I'm going to get. And so these people, though, had so much trust in the landowner that, they said, well, maybe some of them heard also that he was going to pay denarius for the beginning people. So they said, I'm sure he'll pay us the same or more, obviously. not more, but whatever it is that he was going to pay them. So while the owner does not promise a particular wage, these workers knew it would be fair. Look at verse 6, and whenever I just say a verse, I'm sure Hannah will put it up for me. In verse 6, there's a phrase there that says, found still others standing around. Well, I want you to know that is not because they were lazy, but rather they were unemployed. And those of you who have been unemployed or have gone through unemployment, I'm not going to have you raise your hand, but I'm going to raise my hand. Because I've gone through that several times. And that's what they did until someone came to hire them. They stand over there and wait for work. This pattern continued for the hirings at the 3rd hour, at the 6th hour, and the 11th hour. And the Jewish workday began at 6 a.m. This was called the 1st hour. The 3rd hour began at 9. 6th hour began at noon, and so on and so forth. The 9th hour is at 3, and the 11th hour at 5 p.m. It is at this point that the parable takes a dramatic turn. You look at it and you go, okay, this is some schedule, he's just hiring workers. But at this point, the parable takes a dramatic turn. By the 11th hour, which is 5 p.m., I'm home by 5, and I'm not working anymore by 5. The work on most plantations would have been winding down at 5 p.m., and the laborers waiting for work at this time would have lost hope. Yet on this particular day, it was different because the generosity of the landowner. It is clear that he is interested not only in his vineyard, but also in the unemployed, because the vineyard would have been done. So we see that there are two groups of workers, those hired early who went to work after negotiating a wage, and those hired later who went to work without contract, choosing to trust the goodness of the master. And though Jesus does not say it, the implication is clear. All workers, up to those hired, were paid a denarius. And because of human nature, we can imagine how the laborers who worked all day felt. And whenever I read this, I go, put a bunch of Filipinos in this situation. And the people who were hired at 6 were paid a denarius, or let's say $50. The people who were hired at 9 paid at $50. Those who were hired at 3 were paid $50. Those who were hired at 5, when the work is almost done, were also paid how much? $50. And all the workers got paid 1 denarius. And the natural thought would have been, if the owner gave them $50 for 1 hour, those of us who have worked 12 hours, we must be getting a lot of money. However, their hopes were dashed because they received how much? 1 denarius, the same pay. And their joy actually turned to anger. I'm telling you, imagine if you put a bunch of Filipinos working in the vineyard. Their joy turned to anger as they realized that they received the same pay as those who had worked only 1 hour. So they complained. Look at verses 13 to 15. But he answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, friend, the owner said. Didn't you agree to work for denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money, or are you envious because I'm generous? What the landowner paid other laborers, or what the landowner did with his own money, was no business of anyone else. Then Jesus brings the parable to its appropriate end in verse 16. So the last will be first, and the first will be last. Only Jesus can say that, because any logical person living in today's society will not say that. No, if you're first, if you're first, you'll get more. If you're last, you're not going to get a lot. They always say that the early bird catches what? The sale. The early bird catches not the worm, but the sale. The sale at Costco, the sale at Macy's, and the sale everywhere else. So the last will be first, and the first will be last. And in the kingdom of God, our perceived position makes no difference. And this is the key. Our perceived position, we might say, well, we've been here from the very beginning. Or we were here in the middle. Why are we the same as the ones who just came? Our perceived position, and by the way, that's our perception. Our perceived position makes no difference because God shows no partiality. This is called grace. It's been said that Christianity is supremely a religion of grace, and that is certainly true. But even so, grace is not well understood and often not really believed. We use, by the way, in the Christian language, in the life of a Christian, in the life of a church-going Christian, we use the word grace a great deal, but we really don't know a great deal what it means. When the great question of what's the difference between mercy and grace, and I don't care if I asked that question 19 years ago, 17 years ago when I started pastoring. Wow, it's been 17 years ago when I started pastoring. And all the way to today, if I ask you the same question, I tell you the truth, and I guarantee you I'm going to get the same answer. Because there's only one answer to that question. What is the difference between mercy and grace? And we answer with what most Christians say. Mercy is deserved, and grace is not. And when I ask, well, can you dig down and go deeper with that? We're like, no, that's all I can say about that. Mercy is deserved, grace is not deserved. But it still does not explain to us exactly what grace is. In his book, and if you have a chance to read this book, I recommend that you read it. What's so amazing about grace? Philip Yancey points out that part of our problem is in the nature of grace itself. Because grace is scandalous. It's hard to accept. It's hard to believe and hard to receive. Grace shocks us in what it offers, and it's truly not of this world. What did I say? It doesn't operate in this world. It frightens us with what it does for sinners. Grace teaches us that God does for others what we would never do for them. We would save the not so bad, but God starts with prostitutes and then works down from there. Grace is a gift that costs everything to the giver and nothing to the receiver. It is given to those who don't deserve it, barely recognize it, and hardly appreciate it. That's why God alone gets the glory in your salvation. That is why God alone gets the salvation it gets the glory in my salvation. Jesus did all the work when he died on the cross, and that work on the cross is grace that he gave to everyone, whether you came early, whether you came in the middle, or you came later. When Vessels of Hope was founded in 97, some of you were already coming and worshiping here since 1987. It wasn't called Vessels of Hope then. This church is indebted to the members of Philippine Christian Fellowship who started this church, and to the late Pastor Ilana, whose picture you saw a while ago. Those of you who have been here from the very beginning are the 6 a.m. people. And then if you came a few years later, you're the 9 a.m. people. And so on and so forth. And like the parable, we came to this church at different times. 6 a.m. when it just opened, 9 a.m. when it was opened up a little bit more, 12 noon, it's getting its legs. At 3 p.m., we're getting to be good in what we're doing. And at 5 p.m., we're really good now at this point. When Jesus called you to be workers for this church, the 9 o'clock people did not find the same situation as those of you who arrived later on. The 3 p.m. people benefited a lot from the earlier work of the 6 a.m. people and the 9 a.m. people. That's why members who have been here the longest, even those who have gone on from this church, still get a warm feeling how they look at this church and go, oh yeah, I was there in the beginning. I was the first ones who started. I was there when that was happening. But if you were one of the early comers, human nature dictates you to be shocked and upset that the 3 p.m. people and the 5 p.m. people did not have to do as much work as you did. Yet they get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. It's really as easy as saying this. I am grateful to my Father for starting this church, and grateful to the Lord for calling him to start this church. But I'm sure if he's still alive right now, he would go, well, all the other benefits that you have, it's because of what has happened in the beginning. One of the best illustrations for this truth is church budgets. And I want you to listen to me. Every single one of you. Old members of the church tend to look at savings like the building fund and say, well, we established that. We started that. We built that. And then the new generation comes in, and I'm one of the new generation, and we want to do this, we want to do that, and this is what. Listen, once you've given to the Lord, let the Lord do whatever he wants to do with what he has given you and what in turn you have given back. The parable of the vineyard is a parable about our service and our giving to God and why it is that we serve in his kingdom. None of us, whatever we came, at 6 a.m., at 9 a.m., at 12, at 3, at 5, have to be afraid of being shortchanged by God. Because your God is a generous God. This parable is teaching that our service to God is equally important no matter when we came to him. Therefore, none of us can look down upon the work of another as being less spiritual or less important. Being faithful in picking up the trash in front of the church is just as much as a way of saying thank you, God, as the one singing the finest songs or the finest solo or preaching the greatest sermon. It is the same God who gives the ability to do all three. God does not judge us by the work that we do. Let me say that again. God does not judge us by the work that we do, but rather the reason why we're doing the work. God calls everybody to come and to work in this field, and until we give our lives to Him, we are like potential workers who are just standing around doing nothing. That is why Jesus said, many are called, but few are what? Chosen. We choose to be chosen by coming with a mind to work for the Lord. And so finally, all I'm saying here is please don't come with the idea that somehow God is going to owe you something for all that you do for Him. He is a generous God, but He is also a sovereign God. And He should do whatever He wants to do, and He will do that. Come knowing what God has done for you is already more than you can repay. Let me say that again. Come knowing that what God has done for you on the cross on Calvary is already more than we can repay, and certainly more, much more than we deserve. Amen? Amen. Please stand and we're going to pray. And we're all